the war becomes evident that it is not about removing Native Americans, but it is more so about getting these blacks back into slavery.
Profoundly so.
Not only for the work,
Yeah.
because there is a number that could change things in terms of work. There's a large enough workforce there that could be garnered, right? But not only that, not only the workforce, it is the concept, right? It's the idea that you have an area that is growing into a colony that could be go from a settlement to a colony that could go to its own nation based on the fact of the opposition of slavery. Meaning our slaves, as plantation, our enslaved people, right, will get the notion to go to Florida because there is a black nation there.
It's evident that he cares. What do you care about? Welcome to the Rock Newman Show. It's the Rock Newman Show.
The Minister of Wellness Ministries and Rock Newman Show 2.0 present free community health fair and seminar Saturday, March 18th, 2023 at Union Temple Baptist Church, Washington, D.C. RSVP before we reach capacity, dmvhealthfair.eventbrite.com or click the link in the description box. If you can't make it in person, no worries. You can purchase the live stream link by visiting theministerofwellness.com under healing services, or once again, just click that link in the description box. Calling all potential vendors, sponsors, or volunteers, please submit a contact form via theministerofwellness.com or call 888-847-8026. That's 888-847-8026. It's high time for a health revolution.
So what we see is now the Gullah dialect, Gullah language starting to incorporate Native American words. And so once that happens, we see a metamorphosis, and we don't call that Gullah. We actually call that the Afro-Seminole Creole language.
Okay.
And so that is the mixture between Gullah, which again is the West African and English words, and now we have certain Native American words that are put into it, and that is what changes it, and that's what really puts us on that road to saying Gullah is a diaspora. So now in that, right, back to the relationship itself, this cohabitation continues to grow.
Yes.
Because plantation society is encroaching upon Native Americans, and it's encroaching in that they're chasing away the food, which means they're changing their way of life. And so they are also having to depend on these runaways as well to show them how to actually plant different crops, how to rotate different crops in order for sustainability now.
Right.
Because they can't rely on the hunting that they have done for eons of years prior.
And let me interject, please, because when you say plantation life, I want my viewers to make sure they understand what that is. That plantation life is about enslaving people to be able to grow the plantations.
Right, but it's also turning, for Native Americans, is turning the land into an agrarian society. See, all those open fields where the deer ran and the bears went where they could have plenty of food, rabbits and all of that, are now being chased out because you have enslaved people who are now turning over the ground, turning it all into fields. And so that is also the encroachment, that they are losing their food supply as well. And so they are being forced out of the area. They're being forced out of the area as well as plantation society grows. So they began to cohabitate. Now, here's, I have to tell you this, and this is important, and it kind of leads back to why you also get some of these negative words. We've always had those general savage terms for Native Americans, but the ironic thing about this particular case, and the ironic thing about the Seminoles, is the Seminoles are a homogenous group of Native Americans themselves. They are actually The majority of them are former Creeks. What happens is there's a large schism in the Creek Nation. The Creek Nation breaks. You have your upper Creeks that live in northern part of present-day Alabama. They're up, of course, by the mountains up in that area. And then you have your lower Creeks that are down in that corner between Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, right? And so what happens is the ones in the South, they began to accept plantation society. They even began to buy and trade enslaved people. And so they began to not resist plantation, but actually join and work with plantation society. And so the Creeks up north were basically, what are you doing? We don't own people. We take them as war. We hold them so we won't have to fight them again. We keep their women so we can keep our numbers up. But we don't enslave them for our own living. You know, what are you all doing? And so there's this schism. And so the northern Creeks push their way rather, through Alabama. They push through the southern Creeks and they come into Florida. And so when they come into Florida, they mix with the other Native Americans that are also running. You have the Miccosukee, like I said, you have the other smaller bands. You even have some Cherokee that are leaving North Georgia and the other areas of Georgia, and they're coming down into Florida. These are smaller bands, though, that are kind of broken away because they needed to figure out how they were going to survive as well. And so they become this homogenous group that we call the Seminoles. And it actually, when you look at the word and you trace it back, Semolina, Cimarron, it has different meanings, but the main one is Breakaway Creek or Renegade Creek. That's why everything you see with Florida State University and they say the Seminoles, the first thing you see up on it is Renegade, because that is one of the original terms for Semolina. The first Seminole War opened up plantation society for Florida.
Opened up plantation society. Opened up where landowners came in and built wealth off the back of slaves.
And taking the land from the Native Americans.
And taking land, yes.
To do so.
Right.
And so what we see with that first war is, with the first Seminole War, they get to clear out the Native Americans out of North Florida, particularly the area from Tallahassee to Gainesville, because that land was considered as fertile and in some places more fertile than even Georgia. And at this time, Georgia was becoming cotton king. And so the expansion into Florida, they figured had to be done. And so when they remove them, we see plantation society coming in, but also this is when Florida becomes a territory. Florida becomes a territory just after the first Seminole War.
And you're right. And once Florida became a United States possession in 1821, whites were infuriated by black-Indian relationship. Thus, from 1821 to 1835, relations between Seminoles and whites steadily deteriorated. So, how dare you, inferior people, have a civil relationship?
And not only that, continue to work together against us. See, that's the thing. But they gave them that common, you know, the enemy of my enemy. Right.
Sure.
And so what we see is that first war, right, clearing out the land, Florida becoming a territory. The second one, the one that the book is based on, that ends up being a 7-year war. Now, here's the issue with that. We have Native Americans who are agreeing to leave. Then we have Native Americans who said we're not going to leave.
Right.
And one in particular is Osceola. He's not a chief, but because of his war attributes, he becomes a war chief. And so you have those who are willing to stay, who want to stay and don't want to leave. But at the same token, you have your Black Seminoles, right? And at this point, we stop calling them Maroons and we call them Seminoles because they now make a concerted effort to not only live together. We have familial relationships now. It usually happens at the top, but they're still doing it. They're cohabitating together. All of those good things.
And marrying.
Yes, intermarriage. It's usually done at the higher level, but between chiefs and whatnot, but it's being done. And so at that point, right, you got two different things that are going on, right? You got the Native Americans who want to keep the land. You got the blacks who want to keep their freedom, right? And so when they go into this war in 1835, is because they are fueled, of course, by the Indian removal policy from Andrew Jackson, who got his political career in Florida as well. And this is where he actually got the concept to develop the Indian removal policy by helping Florida get rid of the Seminoles the first round in North Florida. Now, once this happens, the war becomes evident that it is not about removing Native Americans, but it is more so about getting these blacks back into slavery.
Profoundly so.
Not only for the work, because there is a number that could change things in terms of work. There's a large enough workforce there that could be garnered, right? But not only that, not only the workforce, it is the concept, right? It's the idea that you have an area that is growing into a colony that could be go from a settlement to a colony that could go to its own nation based on the fact of the opposition of slavery. Meaning our slaves, as plantation, our enslaved people, right, will get the notion to go to Florida because there is a black nation there. And so what happens, what we find is at the end of the First Seminole War and before the second, right, toward the end of the first, well, actually the First Seminole, excuse me, let me get it straight because we want to get the timeline right. There is a fort, and it's called Negro Fort. It was left by the British to these blacks. And for this period of time, that is a progression to a nation. You start out as a settlement, then you go to a colony, the colony gets a fort, then it grows and it develops, and next thing you know, you can get, your colony can develop into whatever else you want. If you want it to be its own country, you want it to be its own nation, you could. And so that was by far the worst idea. That was the worst.
The most troubling.
Well, that was, right, that was the most troubling. That was the worst. That was the worst scenario. Let's say that. That'd be better to say. That was the worst scenario for plantation society. To have these, because they figured as long as they were down here in Florida living free, then they would always have to watch theirs, and they would just continuously run. And then plantation society would start to demise. And some even express the ending of plantation society if this continues to go on in Florida, that this would end plantation society.